Hey, my name's Kyle Daniels, I'm the head of marketing at Assimilate, and we've been working with the guys at IBM to bring you some amazing content on data governance and AI. We hope you enjoy it. All right, well, thanks for joining us. So I'm going to start with a bit of a tough question, a bit of a curveball. So how has AI improved the way that companies make decisions? And it's a question in two parts. Now, knowing what we know about bias showing up in some of these platforms, I'm talking about ChatGPT and Gemini, obviously, how are we ensuring that we're making decisions based on unbiased data? And probably start with you, Gemma.
So I would say that, AI has been affecting business decisions for decades. But obviously the real focus now is around generative AI. So AI in the past, decisions on making loans, on all sorts of aspects of our lives, AI has been there. And that bias, or the danger of biases, has always been there as well. It's become a lot more obvious with some of the things more recently with generative AI. And fundamentally, your AI is only as good as the data that you based it on. And so it all comes down, we've seen this in lots of discussions, it all comes down to the data that the AI has been trained on and that you're using as part of that solution.
And I think it's very true. And I think, it's not just bias, there's hallucination, there's privacy issues. Some of that's the data that's contained in the model. So at IBM, we've done a lot of work around training that model on data that we have legal access to, that we filtered, that we understand, we remove the privacy issues and the copyright issues from. So there's a good foundation there. But also what you were talking about also is, to cut the risk of hallucinations and to increase the accuracy, training those models on your domain starts to make them far more accurate. But I think there's also there has to be an understanding that, essentially generative AI models are dream machines. They generate text and information. So very much it's the skills you use to implement the solution carefully, and how you mitigate those risks, and then probably most importantly, as we see it, how you govern the risk. So not only how do you assess the risk before you create a solution, how you monitor the creation of that solution so it follows those guardrails, but probably as importantly, how you monitor it in real time to see that things are, bad things are creeping in, whether it bias, hallucination, drift, lack of readability or understandability, those types of things.
And because you keep talking about risk there, is probably the biggest risk that reputational risk? Because you've seen, like say, Google obviously had their issues, they addressed it really quickly, obviously credit to them, and they jumped on it and they took the platform down and they looked at it. When you're talking about IBM's AI models, what are you guys doing to think about that reputational risk in the future?
So in terms of the models, as Brenda's already sort of said, we spend a lot of time, so as I said before, ultimately the model is only good as the data you base it on. So if you just base it on a trawl of internet data without curating that at all, you're going to get lots of hate, abuse, profanity, as well as the answers that you want. If you spend time up front curating that data properly and taking out all of the unfactual, the hate, the abuse, the profanity, you take out a lot of duplication, you can make, we'll probably talk about it later, but you can make the model smaller because you're training it against less data. But that data is all far more controlled, and hence the results that you come out of the model are going to be based on that data. So it's all about the amount of effort that you put in up front. And so IBM has done a lot of that, partly, as I say, from a reputational point of view, but also from a performance and sustainability of the model in the first place.
And I think it's worth recognising that there are two sides to this coin. Very much people focus on the regulatory risk, and we've seen the European Act come to life soon, and there are various other FSA and Bank of England and various other organisations are coming up with regulation. But the thing about reputation that I think it's worth remembering is once you've had a problem with your reputation, it can have massive impact and it's hard to recover from. You know, we're talking millions off your stock price if you're a really large company, but we've seen it in the past, you know, that in the past, for those who remember Ratner saying, you know, his stuff wasn't worth very much, completely destroyed his company just with one sentence. And the ability to scale problems and damage your reputation is critical. But that's not a reason, and I see companies reticent to roll out solutions as a result of that. I think it's a question of careful management of the data, to your point, Gemma, but it's also, for me, about how you manage and govern that process in a safe way. You know, we've got plenty of cars on the road. There are rules and regulations about how you can drive a car, how fast you can drive a car, that you have to pass a test and all of those things. But that then gives us the freedom to drive cars pretty much anywhere we like. You know, across the country, and I think it's very much like that with AI. And I think the minute you think that this isn't something that needs managing, that you can just do without really putting those guardrails in place, without, you know, handling the ethics and understanding what the ethical approach, which we should probably dig into, that's where the risk of reputational damage really is at its highest. Sure, there's a regulatory risk, but that's usually a fine, and it could be reputational, but it's nowhere near as the damage you could cause as a result of a reputational breach, call it what you will.
Okay. And so, Chloe, just coming on to that, so we're talking about these almost guardrails to protect companies. I know you guys at Simulate are talking about a data governance framework. Is that essentially what this is for, to almost put some of those guardrails in place to make sure that people are following the right ethics and balancing those opportunities and ethics?
Yeah, definitely. And I think at the moment we're kind of seeing this really like fast-paced moving environment of AI. We've got lots of tools coming out, but also the regulations are changing constantly. So we're trying to get companies to kind of be really transparent about what they're doing, how they're doing it, what decisions they're making, so that when these regulations come into effect, they're good and set, ready to go and compliant.
Is there danger that sometimes those regulations keep changing because AI is working so fast and all these things are changing, and we're seeing it every day, there seems to be something new or some new way of doing something, that the regulations just can't keep up and almost like you're chasing your tail?
Well, yes, but I think one of the ones that we've kind of seen a lot of is kind of this transparency around it. So if a company has created an AI system and they're really transparent on how it works, what they're using it for, and kind of what data they've used to create the model, then even if the regulations do change, they understand what they're doing and they understand the impact of their systems.
I think that's absolutely critical. I think we've seen in other areas within IT, particularly within the area of data governance, we've seen it's a lot of effort. I know that we need to do it. I know that we should do it, but there's too much effort involved. Right now, we know that if you're wherever you're sat in the world, there will be AI regulation. It's in its nascent form, as you say, you know, there will be changes, but the fundamentals, why are you doing it? How have you done it? What data did you use? How are you monitoring it? Those things are fundamental, and if you don't get them right in the first place, then you're effectively, at some point in the future, probably in the very near future, going to have to rip it all out and do it all again. So we're starting to see a lot of people being really serious about this in advance of regulation, rather than just because regulation is there.
I think it's critical. We should remember that what we're talking about is technology. In IBM's view, it's not about replacing human beings. It's about augmenting their work and making it more effective. And some of the most effective solutions I've seen are doing exactly that, you know, being able to do more quicker in a more accurate way in many cases. When we're talking about humans, you know, it's not just transparency, which is really important. It's consultation, helping them understand what it means to them, because we run our whole HR system off a cognitive chatbot within IBM, and it's got a really high rate. I mean, despite the fact I would argue that IBM is probably more critical of systems internally than anyone else on the planet, but essentially that's because they can see the value in it. They understand the value. It's demonstrable. And it hasn't just arrived and been forced on them. They understand what they're getting from it. And I think consultation is really clear, and we've seen evidence of that in the past, deciding GCSE results using AI that wasn't explained, and no one could really understand why they got the result they got. I've got a colleague who's very fond of showing the picture of the students marching on Parliament as a result. But that shouldn't be underplayed. It affects the way humans feel, and therefore governance and regulation, and also the management of AI is critical, because unlike some other systems that we talk about in our industry, it don't affect human beings. This has an intricate effect on how people feel, the way they do their work, whether they feel threatened or not, So I don't see AI governance as a containment. Essentially, it's about setting up the structure so you can industrialize AI at scale safely, and that's really important, I think. So
your analogy with the driving is without governance in place, effectively we're going to end up with the red flag scenario. Because we've seen that. We've seen, this is fantastic, this is really interesting, and then everybody going, yeah, but it could be really damaging. And so everybody pulls back. And if you've got that framework in place, it's an enablement rather than something that stifles. So,
It's an interesting story that when they first put one of the first railway lines, I think it was to Liverpool, the mayor of Liverpool actually got run over by the steam train while they were sort of launching it. So you can, I know that sounds a bit flippant, but I think there's a inevitable charge to what can this give us? Yeah. There's a little bit of a pullback, there's a safety risk, but really, and that's because we're still evaluating and it's still a nascent market. But when we look to industrialize this to actually achieve, to your first question, the advantages that are clearly and potentially there for organizations, having that safety structure in place, or that set of in pipeline tools or manufacturing tools for AI, that means that I can trust the structure I've got. It's representing the ethics that my organization and how it wants to represent itself to its employees and its customers are in place and manifested in the AI it produces. Then there's a great advantage of being able to provide that at scale and really sort of start to represent your company using those tools and take advantage of them. And I think we're on the cusp of that now. I think lots of people have evaluated generative AI and they've looked at how it might do things, but now it's how do I put this into production? And that's the critical step.
Yeah. I was going to say, in danger of taking this off the tracks a little bit, I just want to go back to what you mentioned about the GCSEs, and I'm going to put the cat amongst the pigeons a little bit. If, as companies, we trust AI to make decisions for us, and like you said, you guys are using it internally and companies are using it now to drive decisions within the business. Mm-hmm. Why can we not trust it to give kids GCSE results, which I suppose us around the table probably don't really remember our results too well, and maybe they didn't make too much of a difference in where we are now? So
first of all, that trust comes from the transparency. Okay. So when you say we trust AI, I don't trust AI. I trust some AI. Right. Yeah, and it's down to the transparency. If if in that scenario it had been clearly explained, these are the measures that are being evaluated, and from that this is how we're getting to an answer. If you've got that, then people can start to evaluate that, and they may decide, well, I don't think that's quite right, or that's not quite right. But if you see what the process is, then that's the basis for the trust.
Brendan's raring to go. I can feel it.
It's interesting because it's no different to if you applied for a loan and someone said no.
Yeah.
What would be the first thing you'd think? You'd think, well, why?
Yeah.
explain to me why I haven't been given it. So it's explainability, transparency. But what criteria did you use to decide I can't have this loan? So, I think it's inevitable we look.
Computer says no, it's not. It's not a valid answer.
And I think it's inevitable to really give a lot of ownership to AI. AI is just computational maths, right? Essentially. This still boils down to the human need to understand why. And I think if we start building systems in this space that are human-centric and we realize the sort of needs of human beings and are sensitive to those, what we'll build is systems that can easily be adopted. I mean, I go back to our internal HR interface. They could have spent millions of pounds building that, and if no one had used it, what was the point? Yeah. So it's not just a question of, do I understand it? Is it transparent? But it's a question of adoption. If you're going to get your customers and take advantage of the advance in AI, people, your customers or your employees need to use the system for you to realize that advantage. And part of that is, answering their need to really understand. And I don't think that's going to change now or in the next 2-3 years. It's just something we've got to be more sensitive to.
And the other point, going back to you, AI making decisions. As Brendan says, one of the things that we believe fundamentally in IBM is that AI is about augmenting people's work and augmenting the decision-making process, not it's removing humans from the whole process. So, I mean, we think of pretty much every news item that we see, every news bulletin. There'll be something about what we might call knowledge workers, but people in public duties who are completely overloaded with their workload. Mm-hmm. And the power of AI to assist with that workload is huge. And it's not replacing people. It's taking away the mundane, the drudgery that takes a huge amount of time and effort, and generally speaking detracts from the job satisfaction hugely. I think that the potential value there, but again, it's about assisting these people and not about replacing.
And it's funny, right? You see in the press, it's going to replace jobs, it's going to reduce jobs. Most of the companies I talk to your point, have such a backlog of work. Yeah. You could think in coding, for example, which is an area that has a massive advantage, and everyone's thinking, well, that'll mean that we'll employ no coders or less coders. The fact is their backlog of work is years long. So if it starts to eat into that backlog and enables them to focus on higher value stuff, then that's going to be goodness. But I think it's easy in emotive in the press to say that this is about removing jobs. I do think, however, there is a responsibility, back again, a human responsibility to communicate within businesses about how you intend to use AI so that people don't get stressed and worried about their future, but also communication and training. And an example internally is the people who used to answer the telephone in our HR division. Many of them are now training our HR interface to answer questions. And in that process, they moved up job role, they moved up salary because it became a higher skilled role. So I guess what I'm getting at there, it's communication about how you need to mold yourself into a new role and adapt, but also what the advantages of being able to do that and what it can mean for you. It's not about this is gone, it's just about an evolutionary change that we need to work with people to go through. So I think while we're implementing AI, if we forget the need to train and retrain people and help them support this transformation, it's like any other business transformation, then we're also going to fail to fully leverage the benefits.
So where is the balance between AI driving growth, but then ensuring that it is keeping those ethical standards in place? So we'll probably start with you, Gemma.
So from an IBM point of view, we have an ethics board. So we have a group of people who will evaluate a new use case, product, whatever it is, and to make a decision as to whether that's ethically acceptable, because ultimately we're back to reputational risk. That's the thing that we have to protect for our company and for every organisation.
And certainly I'm saying, and certainly within the tooling that we now provide within our governance solution, the looking at use cases is a case of assessing the risk before you build it. And that might be regulatory risk. It might be, as you said, from the ethics board, which I like to think is the difference between the regulation and breaking the law. You know, just because you can, should you? There's a lot of grey area there. And also, do I want to represent my company in this way? You know, there's a lot of that, and I think it's a really strong ethical thing. But also, it's assessing it. Does this solution meet its financial goals? You know, are we going to spend more money building this than it returns us an investment? Is this the right use legally? You know, all of these stakeholders need to be involved in that decision making, and that's very much part of the way we assess it before you build it. That's a business decision, and previously I think we put a lot of pressure on data scientists to interpret regulation, to interpret corporate policy, when actually, you know, most data scientists, I think, want to do data science. You know, they want to use their skills to imagine and build things. And I think now what we see is putting that back in the hands of the business to work with the data scientist to produce guardrails so that then they can focus on their core skill, you know. And I worry when I see a data scientist being asked to ethically sign off a piece of work they've done. I mean, that's quite scary for them, and I think that's why so many of them are leaving the market. So,
yeah. I was going to say, speaking of data scientists, Chloe, perfectly set up.
So kind of on the point of like guardrails and stuff, I think from a Assimilate point of view, we're trying to get our companies kind of in a place where when they are running with their new AI tools and they're developing tools, that they're not going to get to a point where they're like, oh, we do not know how this works. Like, we know it has this one specific purpose and it will make a decision for us. Do we trust the decision? We don't really know because we don't know what's behind the scenes. So from our point of view, I think we're trying to create kind of the ideas and the education behind what those ethics might be, what the changing regulations are, so that when the data scientists when we go in and we start coding, we can actually explain how it works to non-technical staff as well. And I think it's kind of an organisational kind of ethics as well, kind of having the whole organisation conversation around it, because a management might have a very different view on ethics to what I think as a data scientist. I like code and like new tools, new shiny tools. We want to keep creating them, right? But management's like cost per it, like is it meeting the needs and stuff? So I think, yeah, creating literacy around ethics and creating the education. Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for your time today, guys. And we will see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.